How's it going, everyone? I'm Dumb Zeno, and this video is going to be the big one. In this video, I'm going to be doing my best to make sense of most of the mechanics of Xenoblade 3's world, which maybe not so surprisingly has a lot to do with the Aegises. Also, to fully explain things, I'll need to establish my theories regarding the early history of Aionios. Towards the end, I'll also be reviewing other elements of the story, which we can get more out of with the new perspective I'll be giving. So strap in, I'm going to go down every last detail here. Of course, spoiler warning for all the numbered games in the series, and my recommended play order is on screen. For this one, since it's on a pretty hotly debated topic, I also want to give an additional disclaimer that this is just what I came up with doing my own research, and it's totally fine if you see things a different way. You should interpret the story in the way you feel best fits. Disclaimers out of the way, let's get started. When Aionios began, there was a short window of time before the War of Kevesi and Agnian. During this time, the only ones alive would be those that were unassimilated in origin, plus Zed. The confirmed unassimilated include Shulk, Rex, Panacea, Linka, Melia, Nia, and the 7 legendary Nopon, including Riku. It's possible that there were more that were unassimilated, but later died in Aionios, as there is an indeterminate amount of time in between the creation of Aionios and the events of Future Redeem. In Lower Maktha, there is a gravestone with Ricky's biter weapon, so he either died in Aionios or he died before the worlds collide. I think it's more likely the former, since there's no known reason why Ricky would have died in a couple of decades or so from the ends of 1 and 2 until the collision. These unassimilated do not age in Aionios, but they aren't immortal, they can be killed. When they die, they are assimilated into Origin and are reborn in the rejoined world. The reason for why these people were unassimilated is most likely due to a small but significant amount of hope in Origin. This hope would allow the unassimilated to walk their path in Aionios and eventually set up Ouroboros to defeat Moebius. If you'd like to know more about why Origin has this function and other functions that it has, check out my last video, Alpha's Plan. Despite being unassimilated, they still have irises, as we can see in Future Redeem, so at some point after the collision they would have had to have gotten those. This short period of peace is the time when the siblings' picture was painted. As to who the people in the photo are, we can guess, but it's unlikely we'll ever know for sure. Since it was painted before the Kevesi-Agnian War, they must be unassimilated unless they were soldiers being born outside of the war for some unknown reason. I think that they're probably the other kids of the main cast. One resembles Rein very closely, so maybe Panacea's brother. The blonde gives off a kind aura opposite to Glimmer. Perhaps it's Mithra's child, who has a more Pyra-esque personality. The child with white hair resembles Nael. Perhaps a second child that Rex had with Nia. One of the children has a similar haircut to Shulk in Xenoblade 1. Perhaps Nichol's brother. The other 3 don't bear any obvious resemblance from what I can see, but my best guess would be that one or more of them are Dunban's children. At some point after this short period of peace, Zed began the Kevesi-Agnian War. In response to this, the Liberators were formed by the unassimilated. Nia becomes the Pneuma avatar and Melia becomes the Logos avatar. They decide to create weapons to be used to oppose Zed's war. The 7 legendary Nopon create the Firelight Swords, the Monado Rex Plus, and the 2 Swords of the End. It's known that the Swords of the End and the Monado Rex Plus all contain Origin metal imbued with Melia's memories of the 7 party members of Xenoblade 1 and their souls to some degree, hence the nickname Lucky 7. As for the Firelight Swords, they definitely contain Origin metal as they're able to cut flame clocks, but it's not stated whether or not that Origin metal has been imbued with anything, though I suspect they are imbued with memories from Nia and or the souls of the Xenoblade 2 cast. And to be clear, there are 2 versions of Lucky 7 / the Sword of the End, as you can see here. End's sword is a dark gray with a differently shaped hilt than Noah's silver Sword of the End. Some might speculate that End's Sword of the End contains different memories and souls than Noah's because of its appearance, but as we'll see later, the swords are functionally identical, so I doubt this. The Monado Rex Plus containing the same memories as the Swords of the End is an interesting thing, since then you might expect them to be functionally the same. There may be some truth to this, but overall, we never see Shulk's Monado Rex Plus do anything special except for cut flame clocks. I think that the resonating feature of Origin metal should be present in any weapon that contains Origin metal, though the only weapons we see this for certain in are Matthew's fists and Noah and End's Swords of the End. It could just be because there's not much of an opportunity to show it happening, considering there's only a few blades that have Origin metal in all of Aionios. Towards the end of the video, I'll speculate on this some more. Anyways, the Swords of the End were entrusted to Riku to pass them on to those that would be worthy of wielding them. Soon after the war began, Zed captures Melia and uses her heart to access Origin. He also replaces her as the Logos avatar. Though Nia also possesses an administrator heart, which is her own, as well as Pneuma, the overwhelming Moebius feelings in Origin left her with very little ability to resist Zed. The reason Zed was able to overpower Melia so easily was probably because Logos aligns with Moebius ideology, whereas Pneuma aligns with Ouroboros ideology. Logos would rather have Zed as an avatar than Melia. You could say that Moebius is a generally logical ideology, but one that ignores emotions and spirit. Logos is representative of logic and reasoning, and would probably agree on the basis that it is logical to be afraid of what will happen after the worlds collide, and so instead the logical determination to live an infinite hedonistic existence, even if it means the suffering of many others. Moebius get to live forever, but at the cost of losing their humanity, figuratively speaking. You could say that Moebius abandoned the importance of emotions for the logical desire to live forever. Pneuma is representative of life, soul, and emotion, and opposite to Logos and Moebius ideology, and one that aligns with Ouroboros ideology. If you'd like to learn more about the administrator system of Origin, I explained my view of it in Alpha's plan, so check that out if you'd like to understand more about how Origin decides who is granted his power. After becoming the Logos avatar, Zed is able to make avatars of himself, and he makes his first two avatars, X and Y. I think that X is more Agnian based on her American accent, while Y is more Kevesi, but they're both fully Moebius, not based on any real person. Zed would soon start making Moebius from soldiers he thought were suitable. For each of his avatars, he provides a Moebius core, allowing them to assume a Moebius form. As avatars, they're able to wield a Moebius blade. Or is it a Logos blade? This is where things start to get complicated. You see, these Logos blades do not actually contain the Logos core, just like Matthew's gauntlets do not actually contain the Pneuma core. As you can see, the core that appears on Matthew's fist is transparent. The physical Pneuma core is somewhere else in Aionios. What I'm saying is, in a very similar way to how Matthew has Pneuma in his gauntlet, what I would call a Pneuma-Blade, Moebius have Logos and they are unique weapons. Let's continue this in the next section. In order for us to understand the role of the Aegis cores in Aionios, we need to understand how irises and blades work. Blades can be called and dismissed on command, but where are they actually stored? Blades are stored inside Origin, and every person in Aionios is connected to Origin via their iris. Zed has control of these irises and thus blades to some extent, though this control can be resisted via the Ouroboros power. Normal soldiers in Aionios can only wield their assigned blade. This blade can be modified, but they cannot use another soldier's blade, unlike Ouroboros. Ouroboros are able to use others' blades by spending time fighting alongside the person whose blade they would like to inherit. In the game, we see this with heroes and with the people of the city being able to wield each other's blades. In the city, it's sort of a rite of passage for people to choose their blade. For Moebius, it's unclear if they have the same ability as Ouroboros to wield any blade, but they primarily use their Moebius weapon. Moebius are also seen wielding the weapons of their own soldiers in some scenes. Since the Moebius and Ouroboros abilities are of the same nature, I would urge towards that they have the same ability as Ouroboros to wield any blade, but they choose to use their Moebius weapon because that's what they are best suited with, unless Zed has artificially applied some restriction to his avatars. As I mentioned before, blades can be modified. One way is through amps, which are mentioned as an Ouroboros power alternative by Matthew in Future Redeemed, but is not seen in the main game to my knowledge. Since we have almost no information about amps, there's not really much I can say about them. The other way is through Origin Metal. Origin Metal can be added to a blade to make it stronger and enable it to destroy flame clocks. What else is unique about Origin Metal is that unlike normal blades, blades with Origin Metal cannot be shared between multiple users. Sure, a person can physically give their metal-infused blade to someone else for them to inherit, but the giver will not be able to call that metal-infused blade anymore because it's restricted to its current owner. This is demonstrated in multiple ways in the main game of Xenoblade 3. First, the Sword of the End. Noah keeps the Sword of the End in a sheath, which is essentially a normal blade. You can even see the hilt of the sword. When other party members equip the Swordfighter class, the hilt is replaced entirely by the sheath, which is slightly modified so that it can be wielded without the Sword of the End inside of it. Also, after the main party's weapons are upgraded with Origin Metal, only the original wielder of that blade will wield the upgraded version, since it contains Origin Metal. Everyone else will still only wield the original, non-upgraded version. And just one more thing before moving into the murky region of Aegises. Irises can also be used to transport small quantities of items between people via Origin, and this system probably uses the same or very similar technology as how blades are called. This ability is used in the Collectopedia cards, and I believe they are canon. Large quantities of items still must be transported traditionally, unfortunately for the colonies. Nopon have terminals that serve mostly the same purpose as Irises, which is why they're also able to have Collectopedia cards. Now, finally, let's talk about the Aegises. From now on, to refer to the type of Aegis which Matthew uses, where the core is not physically present, I will be using the term Aegis-Blade. This is to avoid confusion, as later on I will speculate on the location of the actual cores. Pneuma and Logos, the physical cores, are connected to Origin. They are a significant part of the authorization system of Origin. You can see my last video for more information on that, and they're able to use Origin as a kind of pseudo-conduit. I'll go into more detail about that in a bit, but what's important right now is that these cores have access to the Blade and Iris system. Pneuma conducts the power of Ouroboros. That is, Origin grants it power based on the quantity of Ouroboros feeling in Origin, and vice versa for Logos and Moebius. This is why Nia is so powerless, despite containing both traditional forms of authorization, which is a Queen's Heart/Soul and an Aegis core. Aegis blades manifest in a very unique way. To understand how they manifest, you must think of them as having two parts: the core part and the blade part. This means that the blade part of an Aegis blade is really not significantly unique from any other blade. This is why other party members are able to wield Noah's Aegis blade. They're only using the blade part, not the core part. So basically, the core part has a respective blade part, which has special characteristics when compared to normal blades. The blade part can be used by any Ouroboros. The core part can only be used by the one who originally possessed it. This is also why the main cast is able to wield Triton's Logos Blade. They're only using the blade part of his Aegis-Blade. Only Triton possesses the core part. The core part can resonate with Origin Metal to become much stronger than if it was just by itself. Interestingly, all Moebius except N do not have Origin Metal in their blade, so they do not use this feature of their Aegis-Blade. Instead, they prefer to assume Moebius form if they need more power. It can be seen very clearly that Noah and N both charge up their Swords of the End using their respective Aegis-Blade in battle. N uses a Logos Blade, Noah uses a Pneuma-Blade. I will go over how they came to possess those in a little bit. Interestingly, when the swords resonate with the core part, the sword itself shows the glow of its respective core part where the user is touching it, rather than the sword just resonating/vibrating and the core part showing that Aegis glow. Every one of Noah's unlimited sword arts seem to have the Sword of the End resonating in some way with his core part, with some green light as part of every animation, along with yellow and gold, which is the generic color for the Ouroboros power, which can be seen when performing fusion arts. Noah's Power Razor art gives a good example of the core part shining with Pneuma's light in his gauntlet, without the sword showing any effect. Whereas with Harmonic Wave and Tachyon Slash, green and yellow light is emitted from where Noah's hand is holding the sword, notably on the hand without the gauntlet. This property shows the Sword of the End can emit the light of the Aegis it is resonating with, even if the core is not in direct contact with the sword, which explains why the Sword of the End was able to emit Pneuma's light in the end of Future Redeemed, when N stabbed it into the ground. It was resonating with the core part of Matthew's Pneuma-Blade. I mention this because I've heard some people say that because of this effect, they believe that the Sword of the End by itself is related to Pneuma. Because of what I found here, I have to disagree. It seems that in order to function, the core part may have to be used in combination with a blade. In Future Redeemed's training fight with Gondor, we see him use Ouroboros power, but since he is not wielding a blade, his Ouroboros power manifests with a normal yellow color, similar to Nile in the base game party. However, in the scene where he is stabbed by N, he's able to call upon the core part of his Pneuma-Blade to resonate with the Sword of the End he was stabbed with, even without using a blade of his own. This shows him glowing with the same Pneuma green and Ouroboros yellow that Matthew glows with, showing that he is still able to call upon the core part of his Aegis-Blade, the blade part of which was imbued with Origin Metal and passed down to Matthew. This allows him to make his gambit and unleash a ridiculously powerful attack. Now that we know how an Aegis-Blade functions, how does one come into possession of an Aegis-Blade? Can it be given to others like a blade containing Origin Metal can be physically given to another person? Well, there are multiple ways that one can come into possession of an Aegis-Blade. The first is to become an avatar of an Aegis core. Yes, you heard me correctly. An avatar of an avatar. This is essentially what all Moebius are, as they're all avatars of Z, and Z is the avatar of Logos. I was first inclined to say that the Moebius core is what allows a Moebius to wield its Logos Blade, except that raises some issues. For example, Console M wields a Logos Blade despite not having a traditional Moebius core. Instead of a normal Moebius core, it appears her core crystal has been modified to perform a similar function, though I don't believe it can provide identical function to a typical Moebius core, which I'll get into later when talking about other manifestations of Ouroboros and Moebius power. If the Moebius core is what granted a Moebius its ability to wield a Logos Blade, then M would not be able to wield one, yet she does. Now you might ask, well, if her core was modified to store life energy, then why couldn't it also be modified to give her authorization to wield a Logos Blade? Then, since all Moebius have cores and all Moebius wield Logos Blades, there shouldn't be a problem. And that's totally valid. Except there's a second reason for why this doesn't work, which has to do with the similarity between Moebius cores and the Ouroboros stones. But for now, we're talking about Aegis-Blades, so I'll cover that second reason in a bit. The other way that one comes into possession of an Aegis-Blade is that the core itself chooses you. This is how Noah and N have come into possession of their Aegis-Blades. And Noah's possession of the Aegis-Blades, in combination to his possession of the Sword of the End, is quintessential to why he's so damn powerful. As to why the cores would choose Noah, I think I know the reason why. Zed states in Chapter 7 that N desires eternity, quote, above all others. This is why Noah is special. His desire to be with Mio eternally is the strongest source of Moebius emotion in all of Origin. And of course, as we know from Future Redeemed, this strong emotion can be utilized by an Aegis core to pull great deals of power from Origin, as it was designed to do. What I speculate is that after the early period of Aionios, after the Kevesi-Agnian War started, Noah and Mio began finding each other in each life. They found each other, life after life after life. Pneuma and Logos noticed this great potential in Noah, and so they both lended their respective Aegis-Blade to him. Keep in mind that at this point I'm not talking about the Sword of the End, only the Aegis-Blades. I think for that some indeterminate amount of time, Pneuma and Logos were essentially fighting over which one would eventually claim Noah for themselves, which is representative of N's internal struggle between Ouroboros and Moebius feelings. Eventually, Riku would notice this particular soldier who possessed these Aegis-Blades, and he too would recognize the great potential that he possessed. So Riku granted him one of the Swords of the End, and Noah's Aegis-Blade took the form as we see it on N's hip in the game. From that point on, Noah would continue to respawn already possessing the Sword of the End, unless Riku was somehow collecting the Sword of the End every time N died and giving it back to him on his next respawn, which I find unlikely. And Noah and Mia would continue to find each other in every life, and now they would even reach Homecoming. But Noah's newfound possession of the Sword of the End, the sword that, as Zed puts it, quote, defies fate and makes its essence mercurial, would mean that his intense desire to be with Mio is now capable of overriding the system of the world, and once again they would respawn to find each other. This is the same ability which allows him to retain his blade when he respawns. At some point in this cycle, Noah and Mio found the city with some others after becoming Ouroboros. Their cycle did not stop there. They continued to be reborn, meet as Ouroboros in the city, and reach their 10th term in every life, until the life where Gondor was born. After that, N would choose to become Moebius when offered by Zed. What I've just explained is the reason why N's blade appears to be a Moebius weapon, many lifetimes before he ever became Moebius. It's because he was the wielder of the Logos blade, and despite his attempts at being Ouroboros, his emotions sided much more with Moebius than they did with Ouroboros, and so the blade part of the Logos blade took precedent. N did also use the Pneuma-Blade, however, as Matthew confirms in Future Redeemed, and use the same Ouroboros power that Matthew possesses, which is of course the Pneuma-Blade. One thing to note about blades in general is they have a node on them which changes depending on the wielder. Soldiers have a flame clock, freed soldiers have an empty flame clock, Ouroboros have the Ouroboros symbol inside a flame clock, and all Moebius have a Moebius symbol except for when they're wielding weapons from their own soldiers, in which case they have a flame clock. Knowing what I know now, I would have guessed that before he became Moebius, N's Logos blade would have shown a node with an Ouroboros flame clock, just the same way that Noah's Pneuma-Blade does. But it doesn't, even when he is clearly Ouroboros, not Moebius. Even in main game, when equipping Triton's Logos blade on a party member, the Moebius symbol is replaced by an Ouroboros flame clock. I think this is some decent evidence that the Moebius possessed Logos blades, since there's an abundance of evidence showing that N wields Logos in his blade, and his Logos blade just so happens to have the exact same aesthetic as all Moebius, even before he himself becomes Moebius. I also believe that his blade manifested to appear visually as the Logos blade despite him being confirmed to have possessed the Pneuma-Blade, because of his intense proclivity to Moebius emotion. It was kind of inevitable that N would become Moebius at some point. After N becomes Moebius, it can be reasonably assumed that Pneuma is no longer offering its power to N, since he is fully lost to Moebius. And a note about city blades, they do not appear to have an obvious node on them when equipped by someone from the city, but a node with the Ouroboros flame clock does appear on them when equipped by a party member, just like any other blade. Their node seems just to be a general area of yellow light. Nodes don't seem to be incredibly important, though they certainly do have a pattern. Each person's unique node that appears on all their blades is similar to the core crystal on blade weapons in Xenoblade 2, though in 3 the node seems connected to their iris rather than a genuine core crystal. Okay, so yeah, that was a lot, but that doesn't cover everybody who possesses an Aegis-Blade just yet, does it? No. Vandoms also possess the Pneuma-Blade, as Matthew states in Future Redeemed that N, quote, made it so that city folk, Vandoms, would hand it down through the generations, while the camera focuses in on Matthew's Aegis gauntlets. How N managed to do this is not explained, but I would presume that he wished it, and Pneuma is granting the wish for him by providing the Pneuma-Blade to Vandom descendants. I should make it clear that this does not mean all descendants of N and M possess the Pneuma-Blade, only the Vandom descendants. Nael does not possess the Pneuma-Blade since her Ouroboros power only appears as yellow, and so we can reasonably assume none of her descendants inherit it as well. The genetics of the city people are kind of weird also, since it seems like only the traits of one half of the parents is expressed in each child, rather than a mix. So the more Kevesi-esque descendants, which are the Vandom descendants, inherit the Pneuma-Blade. Now what about Matthew's gauntlet? Matthew got the gauntlet from Old Gondor, and its origins are unexplained, though it had to have been crafted by the 7 legendary Nalpans since it contains origin metal. I would venture to guess that Gondor had an encounter with Riku, and he had the gauntlets made. As for whether any memories are imbued like Lucky 7, I would venture to guess that no memories are imbued. The gauntlets were then physically handed down to Matthew, interestingly skipping his parents, though they are deceased. Matthew then probably handed it down to his children and so on, but I must stress this. The gauntlets are not all of the Pneuma-Blade. The Pneuma-Blade is passed down regardless of the presence of the gauntlets. Like I said earlier, the core part and the blade part are separate. That being said, over the at least 1,000 years in between Future Redeemed and the main game, the gauntlets are lost. We can see young Gondor's gauntlets look completely different, though this begs the question, does this mean that Guernica and Monica and young Gondor all possess the Pneuma-Blade? The answer is yes, they all possess the Pneuma-Blade. However, they are unable to use its abilities. The why has to do with the Ouroboros stone. And to explain that, let's move on to the next section. And here comes the next complicated thing to explain. Moebius cores, Ouroboros stones, and Interlink orbs. To begin, let's establish some structure to the Ouroboros and Moebius hierarchies. Both systems have an Aegis core at the top, Pneuma for Ouroboros, Logos for Moebius. Under the Aegis cores, you have an avatar, Nia for Pneuma, and Zed for Logos. From there is where the differences in the structure begin. We'll start with Ouroboros. The Ouroboros avatar, Nia, distributes the Ouroboros power via the Ouroboros stone. To begin, let's consider what I call the olden Ouroboros stone, which is the Ouroboros stone as it appears in Future Redeemed. This Ouroboros stone is always on, amplifying the Ouroboros power of every person with an Ouroboros iris. In olden times, to gain an Ouroboros iris, one must have been affected by Matthew's gauntlets, which contain the Pneuma-Blade and Origin metal. This has the power to give others an Ouroboros iris. However, soldiers' flame clocks must still be destroyed before they are free. And also, this ability would no longer work on future iterations of the Ouroboros stones, which I will explain in just a bit. With the olden Ouroboros stone, stable interlink / Ouroboros forms are not yet possible without further development of the stone, though the non-interlink Ouroboros powers display an aura, that is, a fleeting manifestation of an interlink orb in Ouroboros form to unleash more powerful attacks. These auras can take a variety of colors, but for ones that use their aura while possessing a Pneuma-Blade, they have a distinctly green aura. I think now would be a good time to explain how exactly interlink orbs work. You could think of interlink orbs kind of like miniature versions of Origin. In Aionios, Origin is basically maintaining an interlink between the two worlds, though it is slowly failing over time as annihilation events increase. We see the worlds collide into this interlink in the opening cutscene. The modern Ouroboros interlink orbs are just the same, except with the bodies of the participants rather than the two worlds. Origin and interlink orbs both harvest the massive amounts of energy that is produced as matter from the opposing worlds approach each other. The catch is that eventually this will result in an annihilation event. The olden Ouroboros stone did not require two people to create this orb, so we can learn from this that the presence of an Aegis in some form, in this case Pneuma in the form of the olden Ouroboros stone, negates the need for two people composed of opposing matter. Why this is likely because there is an opposing matter mechanism inside the olden Ouroboros stone, which collects the energy needed in order for the auras to be used, though this version would not be efficient enough to make a stable interlink. Now let's consider what the Ouroboros stone actually is. We know it contains some form of Pneuma inside it due to its color, and it also contains a piece of Origin metal which is treated by Nia. This Origin metal is probably imbued with the memories / souls of the Xenoblade 2 cast, similar to how Melia imbued the Swords of the End with the memories and souls of the Xenoblade 1 cast. Of course, it does not carry the physical Pneuma core, since there are multiple Ouroboros stones produced over time, but some form of Pneuma is contained. In my opinion, the form of Pneuma inside the Ouroboros stone is some kind of derivative created by Pneuma. Anyways, note that with the olden Ouroboros stone, only one person is needed to form an interlink orb, despite them being fleeting, unlike how it works with the modern Ouroboros stone. This is important. At the end of Future Redeemed, an interlink is successfully achieved when N lends Matthew his Sword of the End, which is used to resonate with Matthew's Pneuma-Blade until Matthew impacts it to, creating an interlink orb. Think of this interlink orb like a spark in a pile of tinder. A spark created with the combined power of the Sword of the End, the Pneuma-Blade, and the olden Ouroboros stone. This spark spreads, and the 5 other interlink participants, Rex, Shulk, Glimmer, Nickel, and Nile, turn into interlink orbs through the power of the olden Ouroboros stone, and then they all combine to become the first stable-ish Ouroboros form that ever appeared in Aionios. This form is extremely powerful, but due to the limited ability of the olden Ouroboros stone, it cannot last for long. This brings us to the modern Ouroboros stone, the one we first see in Chapter 1 of the main story. This version was derived from the olden one, using the data collected in the fight against Alpha. This Ouroboros stone operates differently. First and foremost, this version of the Ouroboros stone is a one-time use type deal. It only needs to be activated once, and then it can turn off. The people it impacted will still have boosted Ouroboros power, even without the stone active. It's unclear if it could stay active to further boost the Ouroboros power, as after Shania takes Phantom's eye patch, it deactivates. Personally, I doubt this modern version has the ability to work as an always-on amplifier like the olden version did. There are consequences for this new one-time use model. Mainly, an interlink orb requires 2 people to form, and the Ouroboros power outside of interlinking is weak in comparison to the auras of the olden Ouroboros stone. This Ouroboros power manifests as the same yellow color lighting for everyone, and can be observed when performing fusion arts in battle. Interestingly, Future Redeemed emphasizes this difference by using a different name, Ouroboros arts rather than fusion arts, and having the UI for Ouroboros arts be green, representing that active connection to the Ouroboros stone. Of course, in the main game the UI is just the normal iris orange, no green to be found. Moebius basically used the exact same effect in battle, except the lightning is red colored. I speculate that the way this modern Ouroboros stone grants its users power is through modifying their iris. The real strength of the modern Ouroboros stone is in its interlinks. Now, instead of relying on the remote olden Ouroboros stone to create an interlink orb for each individual, the modern Ouroboros stone uses 2 bodies composed of opposing types of matter. That is, each pair must have 1 person from either world, or be city natives, as they contain both types of matter regardless, to create the interlink orb. So to recap so far, the olden Ouroboros stone is always on, provides stronger base Ouroboros power in the form of auras, can make fleeting interlink orbs without the need for 2 individuals, and in the end was able to form a somewhat stable interlink when Matthew slammed his Pneuma-Blade onto the Sword of the End, which is origin metal imbued with the memories and souls of the Xenoblade 1 cast. And I'll add that the olden version allows Matthew to use his Pneuma-Blade kind of like its own mini Ouroboros stone. By slamming his fists, which contain untreated origin metal, they're able to turn soldiers into Ouroboros. However, they're still bound to their flame clock until it is destroyed. The modern Ouroboros stone is single use, activated by slamming origin metal treated by Nia, most likely imbued with the memories and souls of the Xenoblade 2 cast, into a form of Pneuma inside the Ouroboros stone. This releases a pulse of light, which has the ability to grant 6 people the power of Ouroboros, and free them from flame clocks if they are soldiers. Due to its single-use nature, the non-interlink Ouroboros power is weaker than the olden versions, however, it allows for stable interlinks using the matter from combining 2 of its users' bodies. This version apparently does not allow Pneuma-Blade wielders to use their Pneuma-Blade in combination with origin metal as a mini Ouroboros stone like the olden one does, probably because it lacks the always-on feature. This is also why modern Phantoms do not appear to wield a Pneuma-Blade, as in order for it to be useful, the user must be an Ouroboros empowered by the Ouroboros stone. None of the surviving Phantoms were affected by the stone, so they're left unable to use any significant form of Ouroboros power or the core part of their Pneuma-Blade. Also, I will note that at some point in between Future Redeemed and main story, Matthew's gauntlets get lost, though recall that the Pneuma-Blade is not passed down physically but automatically. So since the time when those origin metal infused gauntlets were lost, the Pneuma-Blade has still been passed down, though it may just be the core part now that the blade part was lost. Young Gondor wields gauntlets, but they don't contain origin metal. I wonder if those gauntlets are sentimentally passed down through the family. Of course, since they don't contain origin metal, this passing down would just be symbolic, as any blade without origin metal can be called by any Ouroboros given certain conditions. Her gauntlets could possibly be the blade part which takes place of Matthew's gauntlets. As we can see, they are red, just like all Pneuma-Blade parts are, but honestly, it doesn't matter that much since she isn't influenced by an Ouroboros stone anyways. Alright, that was a lot. Ready for even more? Because it's time for us to move on to how Moebius does things. First, let's establish the structure. Luckily for us, Moebius does not change its main methods over time, save for a couple special cases, so it should be somewhat simpler. So, all Moebius/consoles are avatars of Z. Y says as much in Chapter 6. This is a fundamental change from Ouroboros since Nia does not produce any avatars of herself. Also, there's no Ouroboros stone equivalent for Moebius. Or is there? Well, there are Moebius cores, and wouldn't you know it, they work in a very similar way to Ouroboros stones. Moebius cores allow for something that the modern Ouroboros stone does not, and something that we never saw with the olden Ouroboros stones in a complete form. That is, a stable interlink orb with only 1 person. Recall what we know about the olden Ouroboros stones. They allow for fleeting interlink orbs to be created by individuals for their auras, since this version was always on and amplifying. Since the Ouroboros stone contains a form of Pneuma, we know that the presence of an Aegis in some form, along with an opposing matter mechanism, can negate the need for 2 individuals of opposing matter to come together in order to assume a higher form. This means that the Moebius cores are the always-on Moebius equivalent to Ouroboros stones. The differences being that Moebius cores are much better developed than those olden Ouroboros stones. Each Moebius gets a whole one to themselves, and they provide an additional function in the form of storing life energy from flame clocks. Since Moebius cores are the Moebius equivalent to Ouroboros stones, and Ouroboros stones contain a form of Pneuma, I deduce that Moebius cores contain a form of Logos, and just like the Ouroboros stone, it is not the actual Logos core, rather it is some derivative created by the Logos core. For Moebius cores, we can actually prove to some extent that they contain an opposing matter mechanism. Unlike Ouroboros stones, we see Moebius cores get destroyed on multiple occasions. Every time a Moebius core is ruptured, it spits out black fog. We know that black fog is the result of opposing matter getting too close, so this is evidence for that opposing matter mechanism inside of the Moebius cores. This mechanism is even hinted at in a discussion about the Annihilator, when Tyon says, quote, "If Moebius have a way to convert the black fog into energy, then the uses for it need not stop at the Annihilator." Which, by the way, I should mention that the Annihilator probably uses some modified version of Logos and the opposing matter mechanism, just like Moebius cores do, in order to create those annihilation events. Moebius forms take on a more solid appearance than Ouroboros forms, and are able to use life energy from soldiers in order to supplement their heightened forms when they are damaged. This is seen in the battle against Moebius K and in the fight against the D and J Interlink when their limbs are severed. This provides a great advantage against Ouroboros. I think that their more solid appearance is a result of them having the Moebius core right there, rather than Ouroboros, who don't have cores in their normal typical form. Moebius interlinks are significantly different in nature to modern Ouroboros interlinks. In modern Ouroboros interlinks, the two participants become one and the same interlink orb. However, in Moebius interlinks, each Moebius retains their own individual Moebius core. We can also know that each Moebius core is possessed by one of the participants because of this scene in Chapter 6, showing the camera zooming in on the different cores as D and J talk. Despite these differences, it is still a proper interlink. It still requires consent from both participants to cancel, again seen in Chapter 6. Before we move on, I'd like to address the only two unique Moebius cores in Xenoblade 3, and those are N and M's Moebius cores. I'll start with N since his is a bit simpler. N's Moebius core appears as a red X design with a hint of purple on the inside. For his core, I don't believe there to be any functional difference to any other Moebius core, other than he possibly might be able to store more life energy than any other Moebius. This would make sense since, as mentioned earlier, it's established that N desires eternity above all others in Aionios, so him getting a special core to represent that makes sense. I would say that he might not have the opposing matter mechanism, except that when his core is damaged in Chapter 5, it spits out black fog, so it does have that mechanism. This means that in theory, N has the ability to assume a Moebius form and interlink like any other Moebius, but interestingly, he chooses not to. M's Moebius core is truly unique, however. Her Moebius core is just her normal core crystal modified to store life energy. We never see M's Moebius core get damaged, so we never see whether it has that opposing matter mechanism, but my best guess is that it does not have that mechanism. I just struggle to see how that modification could be done to a normal core crystal, especially considering that modification is not done via the modern Ouroboros stone to Agnian Ouroboros, who have core crystals. I guess it's also important to note that this modification was not bothered to be done on any other Moebius that had core crystals before becoming Moebius. For example, Moebius P has an American accent, meaning she has some kind of blade ancestry, yet her Moebius core is no different than any other. Because M does not have the opposing matter mechanism, I don't believe she can assume an individual Moebius form. Despite this, M obviously has Moebius powers, so I think she may have gained them through some kind of Moebius equivalent to the modern Ouroboros stone. This means that she should be able to interlink with other Moebius if she so desires, but she does not have an opposing matter mechanism of her own, so that requirement would be fulfilled by her participant's Moebius core. Neither N nor M are ever seen assuming a Moebius form or interlinking. It makes sense that they wouldn't interlink, as they're both hiding things from each other, and interlinking would allow them to see each other's thoughts and memories. For N, he doesn't want M to see his memories of killing Gondor in the city. For M, she doesn't want N to learn of Nia's location and her possession of the Cloudkeep key, and later on, her plan to abandon him. As for why N never assumes a Moebius form, I'm really not sure, as I'm confident he has the capability to do that, and it would have been cool to see what that would look like. My best guess is he never felt the need to do so, as he already possessed a ridiculous amount of power with his Lucky 7 and Logos-Blade. And before I end this section, I want to address something I said in my first video regarding Moebius cores only being able to be damaged by other Aegis cores, since the only times we see Aegis cores being destroyed is at the hand of another Aegis core. I was using this as evidence to prove that Moebius cores possess some form of Logos, though I'd like to retract it somewhat, as it's not true that Moebius cores can only be damaged by Aegises. There are 3 instances in which we see Moebius cores get mortally damaged by people who do not have an Aegis. First, we have Gondor to Shania at Console S. Though admittedly Shania was weak at this point after fighting with Ouroboros, this was a finishing blow, and Gondor, despite possessing the Pneuma-Blade, was not empowered by an Ouroboros stone, so she really is only using the normal power a blade possesses to do this. Second, we see Juniper deliver the final blow to use Moebius core, though again this is the finishing blow after fighting with Ouroboros. Third, we have Sagiri Sagiri to console F. This is a unique because console F was not weakened by Ouroboros, and Sagiri destroyed his core in a single blow, though she was also using the full power of her Pharaon. So she was using a ridiculous amount of power to do this. Additionally, there are quite a few scenes where we see those that possess Aegis-Blades use their power to swiftly destroy Moebius cores, though this happening is only ever shown in a few scenes. These include Noah damaging En's core with the Sword of Origin, which I'll talk about in a little bit, Noah using his Lucky 7 charge with Pneuma to cut Moebius Q's core, and A using their Origin metal-infused Ontos-Blade to destroy the cores of Moebius Q and R. We do see damaged cores with Moebius H, K, B, L, and V after their fights, but we don't get cutscenes of how exactly those cores were damaged. Ultimately, my conclusion on this is that the actual Aegis cores are really hard to damage without another Aegis, but not impossible. Similarly, Moebius cores are hard to damage without another Aegis, but not impossible. It is confirmed by Matthew that the purpose of the Ouroboros power was to more easily destroy Moebius cores. So I think this still holds true to an extent, but it's not a hard and fast rule as I originally thought it was. And just a quick note about the similarities between Interlink Orbs and Origin is that all of them are powered in one way or another by an Aegis. Origin's center contains the World Spirit, and for most of Aionios' history, the World Spirit's avatar was just Ontos. After the events of Future Redeemed, part of Ontos, A, is still its avatar, but now Shulk and Rex are avatars as well. If you'd like to know more about all that, check out my first video on avatars on the World Spirit. And of course, Ouroboros Interlink Orbs are granted in one way or another by Pneuma, while Moebius Interlink Orbs are granted by Logos in one form or another. Also, to tie the knot on why I said that Moebius cores are not what grants someone the ability to use a Logos blade in part 2, that is because of the major similarities that I draw between the Moebius core and the Ouroboros stones. If Moebius cores granted their users Logos blades, then Ouroboros stones should probably grant their users Pneuma-Blades, but this is not the case. Also, M wields a Logos blade, and if I'm correct about her Moebius core being different, then it wouldn't make sense for her to wield a Logos blade. So we need to find the common thread that ties almost all Logos Blade wielders, and that thread is being an avatar of Zed. So, being an avatar of Zed grants you the ability to use a Logos Blade. Noah being the exception to this rule, as he was granted the Logos Blade long before he became an avatar of Zed. Alright, so we've gotten it through explaining the Aegis' role in Aionios' power systems. Let's move on to the Sword of the End. As stated before, the Sword of the End, aka Lucky 7, contains the memories and souls of the 7 Xenoblade 1 party members, imbued into the sword by Melia. There are 2 swords at the end with different coloring, though functionality-wise there is no difference between the 2 swords. The swords of the end themselves are powerful, with their fate-defying and flame-clock-destroying ability, but their true power is not unleashed until they are paired with an Aegis-Blade. We see both Noah and En do this, though Noah uses much more restraint than En. Noah only uses this feature of his Sword of the End and Pneuma-Blade when using Unlimited Sword and his Infinity Blade talent art. When looking at Noah's harmonic wave art, we can see he jumps in the air, charges his Sword of the End with Pneuma Green and generic Ouroboros Yellow light, then slashes his enemy with a green and yellow effect. En has basically exactly the same art, except his is called Wraith Swordplay. Again, we see him jump in the air, charge his Sword of the End, this time with Logos Purple and generic Moebius Red light, then slashing his enemy with a purple and red effect. The same comparison can be made of En's Primal Chronos art and Noah's Tachyon Slash. Same move, different light. And not to drown you in comparisons, but Noah's Gravity Blow art sends a pillar of green light in the air, and wouldn't you guess it, there are multiple scenes showing that En can do the exact same thing, but with purple light. These swords both have the potential ability to defy the systems of the world that Zed has set in place, though they don't always do that. As we see before Noah and Mio realize the true power of Ouroboros at Agnes Castle, Noah is restricted from drawing his Sword of the End. En is basically the exact opposite, completely aligning with the system of the world that Zed set in place. His Sword of the End is in Zed's control, just like Noah's was before he fully realized the power of Ouroboros. After Noah learns of his true past through Mio, he is able to let go of his Moebius emotion fully and defy Zed's power by becoming Ouroboros and drawing the Sword of Origin. Being able to draw the Sword of Origin is representative of being at the peak of one's chosen ideology, Ouroboros or Moebius. When wielding the Sword of Origin, the power that the wielder has can rival even Zed himself. While in Ouroboros form, Noah draws the Sword of Origin from his chest. Now, I theorize that the Sword of Origin that this Noah has is not merely an upgraded Sword of the End, but actually a true fusion of Noah's Pneuma-Blade and his Sword of the End. This is for a couple reasons. First, this Sword of Origin has no sheath to charge it with, but it still glows with a Pneuma green light when drawn and is insanely powerful. The second reason has to do with what we saw at the end of Future Redeemed. We saw that when combining the ability of the Ouroboros stone, the Pneuma-Blade, and the Sword of the End, an Interlink orb can be formed. Do recall that in modern times we are working with a different kind of Ouroboros stone though. So, in Noah's Ouroboros form, which was granted to him by the modern Ouroboros stone, he pulls the Sword of Origin, a true fusion of his Pneuma-Blade and Sword of the End, with an Interlink orb where the Monado's circle is, just like how Matthew combined the Pneuma-Blade, Sword of the End, and Ouroboros stone to make an Interlink orb in Future Redeemed. There's unfortunately not much else to say about that version of the Sword of Origin, since we only see it a couple times in cutscenes, both kinda at the same event of the overthrowing of Agnes Castle. We do see it in battle as Noah's Ouroboros talent art, where it does still glow in awesome Pneuma green, but I still wish we got to see more of this sword in the game. Next up is N's Sword of Origin, which is actually much different to Noah's. You might predict that his Sword of Origin looks just like Noah's, but with a Moebius core rather than an Ouroboros core on the sword. But his appears much differently. N's has no Moebius core, and still retains a sheath, unlike Noah's, who ditches the sheath. This makes it unclear if N's Sword of Origin actually contains logos within the origin part of the blade, like Noah's does for Pneuma. There is a decent argument to be made that N's Sword of Origin is little more than a fancier, more powerful version of his normal Sword of the End when looking on the surface, especially since N still charges his Sword of the End inside the sheath, which at a glance implies that the sheath still contains his Logos blade rather than the sword itself, like Noah's. However, there is a detail that gives pause to this idea, and that is the node on the sheath. Earlier, I talked about how all Moebius have the same node on their Logos blades. Well, sorry.
I lied.
N's Sword of Origin sheath has a distinct node not seen on any other Moebius blade. It kind of looks like a sharper rendition of the typical Moebius strip symbol with an X crossed through the middle of it. On the Sword of Origin itself, we see an actual three-dimensional Moebius strip. So remember like a couple seconds ago when I said that N is the only Moebius who has this sharper Moebius strip design on his blade?
I lied.
Yeah, so actually we see a very similar design on the Moebius weapon which X uses in Chapter 5. If you remember, this weapon gave X Zed's authority. At the risk of sounding completely brain broken, here is my theory. N's Sword of Origin, including the sheath, is technically composed of 3 separate blades. The sword itself is a fusion of N's Logos blade and Sword of the End, very similar to Noah's, except N does not assume Moebius form to draw it, and the sword does not display a Moebius core, rather it displays a distinct Moebius strip. The sheath, which stores this sword, is actually of the exact same nature of the blade that X was using in Chapter 5. This is why the sheath displays the same symbol as the blade X was using, and why only the sword itself displays a Moebius strip. So, N is charging his Sword of Origin using a different type of blade, which is a blade that comes from the avatar of Logos, Zed. From now on, I will call this type of blade an Avatar Blade. Believe it or not, this is not the only Avatar Blade we see inside Aionios. Nia also wields an Avatar Blade since she is the Avatar of Pneuma. We see on her back that she has the Pyra and Mithra swords with the Pneuma core clearly visible. Even Rex didn't display that core on his blades, so I believe these are the genuine article. Now this one is unique, since we can also equip Nia's Avatar Blade on any of the main party members. It's important for me to note that the Avatar Blades are not the same as the Aegis-Blades I went through before. Nia's Avatar Blade is of the same nature as any normal blade, as it can be wielded by any Ouroboros. As for who can wield an Avatar Blade, I theorize that it's up to the Avatar themselves. Obviously, not just any Moebius could use Zed's Avatar Blade. It seemed like X was given that blade for a special occasion. Similarly, I think Nia can control who is allowed to wield her Avatar Blade, and she has no problem allowing at least the main party to use it. In theory, any Ouroboros could use her blade if she allowed it. And I have one final detail that has to do with the Sword of the End, and it has to do with the memories and souls that we know are kept within the sword. Let's look at that scene in Xenoblade 1 where Shulk obtains his true Monado, or the Monado 3. We see that there are lines connecting all of his friends to him, and then his true Monado appears. If you haven't picked up on it, Shulk's true Monado and the Sword of the End are largely composed of the same thing, the memories and souls of the Xenoblade 1 party. The medium is different, and the relation to an Aegis is different, but that core element remains the same. It is really fitting that the fate-defying sword of Xenoblade 3 would have such a heavy relation to the god-slaying sword. It's also pretty cool that we have 3 Monados composed roughly of the same thing, but each is granted power by a different Aegis in the Trinity. The true Monado by Ontos, and Sword of the End by Logos, and Noah's Sword of the End by Pneuma. It's not perfectly equivalent since the Swords of the End don't really act like a Monado except for when they're charged by the respective Aegis-Blade, whereas Shulk's true Monado is granted by Ontos itself. Actually, the Swords of Origin are much closer to the true Monado since they're fused with their respective Aegis-Blades, so those are actually very close to the same thing. And with that, I've explained basically all the different forms that the Monados take inside Xenoblade 3's world from my perspective. I'm going to add just one more section about a very common question in the series, which is how Noah and Mia were able to be reincarnated despite already existing as Moebius, and then some miscellaneous details that I couldn't find a good place to fit in the main part of the video. Some of these miscellaneous things do contain some pretty important evidence though, so stick around for that. First, let's talk reincarnation. I explained earlier what allowed Noah and Mio to surpass Homecoming. It was Noah's intense desire to be with Mio, and his possession of the Sword of the End, which according to Zed is able to defy fate. But how were Noah and Mio able to be reincarnated even though their Moebius selves were still alive? Well, it's a combination of factors as always. Let's start with when the first factor appeared, during the creation of Aionios. This factor is the feelings of hope within Origin. As I've explained in previous videos, Origin has a function that responds to strong emotion. This feature, and the small amount of hope within Origin at the time of the intersection, is what allowed for certain people not to be assimilated into Origin, as I explained earlier. These same feelings would later contribute to Noah and Mio's reincarnation. The next factor is at the end of Future Redeemed, when Shulk, Rex, and A become avatars for the World Spirit. A states that their hope will surely live on. This is especially important since the World Spirit is the heart of Origin. Even though their power is extremely limited in that form, it contributes. Next, we have M. M was put in a horrible place. She didn't want to be Moebius, but was forced to for over 1,000 years. We know this because of Chris's flashback to the moment modern homecomings were founded, which was noted to have taken place 1,000 years in the past. This is also confirmed by Robo, Nia, and Mio's homecoming. Nia told M that one day she and N would one day meet their true selves. So Nia, and assumedly Melia, were also hoping for the same reincarnation. M also hoped for this reincarnation to happen after this hope was given to her by Nia. As an act of rebellion, M founds the modern homecoming as a tradition to give soldiers dignity in death and slowly remove soldiers from Kevesi and Agnes. Homecoming did exist before this, as Glimmer states that her goal was homecoming, and at that point M would have only existed for as long as it was since N attacked the city, which was like a year at most. Most colonies likely just called their soldiers like Consul V was doing in the scene where modern homecoming was founded. This is probably also when Offseeing was founded as a tradition, with Chris being the first Offseer as confirmed by Robo Nia. So M's rebellion can be symbolized by homecomings and Offseeing, where the soldiers of Aionios are finally offered some kind of dignity. Unfortunately, Zed spun this as a way to increase soldier morale and keep people comfortable within the system of the world. Still, Offseeing is a symbol of M's rebellion. The final factor is N. As much as N would like to deny its existence, there is a small piece of hope deep within him. This, plus all the others' hopes, and N's world-defying Sword of the End, is what eventually allowed for the reincarnation of Noah and Mio despite their Moebius selves still existing. And it is really fitting that the reincarnated Noah and Mio become Offseers, since their very nature is partly as M's rebellion and repentance. I should note that M and N have the same soul as Noah and Mio. Really, all that's different between them is their personal experiences and their wills. When M and Mio switched, they shared each other's memories, and one conscience replaced the other. However, their irises would not change until later. We know this because after M and Mio switch, we see Mio in M's body use a normal Moebius iris rather than the combined one we see at Agnes Castle. Also, Mio would probably have been figured out since we know that Ouroboros irises give off a signal, which would be detected by other Moebius that for some reason M had that signal too. So I think that after M and Mio's body died on the altar, she became one with her other self, merging their irises. This is a bit different to what happens to Noah and N later on. Noah and N merge with each other, and N's Moebius body ceased to exist, though he didn't die like Mio did, as there were no modes. It's stated that he just vanished. Despite N not dying, he resided in Noah in the same way that M was residing in Mio. It makes me wonder a bit that if N died normally, I wonder whether or not he would end up remerging with Noah in the process, and Noah's iris would change. I guess probably not unless N himself wanted that to happen, as M was planning that all along. The N and M that split from Noah and Mio at the end are the Moebius halves that resided within them. They destroyed themselves since N and M's intense Moebius desires were the last significant ones keeping Moebius in existence. Finally, let's move on to the miscellaneous evidences that I've found. There was a scene in the main game that bothered me before I finished Future Redeemed. This was a flashback scene showing Noah before he got Lucky 7 in the training area. What bothered me was that his blade was red, despite not receiving Lucky 7 at that point. However, knowing what I know now, I know why his blade was red. His blade was red because it's not just any blade, it's the Pneuma-Blade. Of course, he would not really be able to use its abilities until he became Ouroboros, but there's no other explanation I can think of for this other than out-of-lore explanations like he's a Xenoblade protagonist, so he gets a red sword. What's more is that his Pneuma-Blade has the same dirty red paint job that Gondor's gauntlets have. To me, this proves the Vandam descendants' possession of the Pneuma-Blade, and also points to me that the blade part of the Pneuma-Blade is still passed down through the generations, as Monica's blade is generically colored despite being a genetic Vandam. Of course, these gauntlets are not the same as Matthew's, so those were still lost at some point in between Future Redeemed and the main story, but this new blade part that young Gondor possesses has taken its place. In the end of the main game, we see the Monado Rex Plus was stored in Melia's room behind the painting, and she thanks everyone. Now, with what we know, she says this because in Shulk's new Origin Metal infused Monado Rex Plus, the memories and souls of her friends are literally in the sword. However, the Monado Rex Plus behind the painting is probably not the new one, since we know Shulk used that, and there was no time in between Shulk becoming the Avatar and the end of the main game where Melia was free to put that blade there, unless we're talking about the short window of time after Origin is freed, but that would mean that the sword was not actually kept there for that long, and Melia just put it right up there before the game ended. I think it's much more likely that this Monado Rex Plus is the one from Future Connected, and she's just saying everyone as a symbolic gesture. Also, I mentioned near the start of the video how the Monado Rex Plus contains the same memories and souls as the Sword of the Yen. I wonder then if the Monado Rex Plus could actually do the same things as the Sword of the Yen, since it contains the same things. Like, imagine if in the end of the Future Redeemed, it was Shulk who stuck his sword in the ground to have it resonate with Matthew's Pneuma-Blade. I think that these things might have been possible, but I don't think they could have happened, since it seemed like nobody except N, possibly A, knew what was really in Matthew's gauntlets, let alone the fact that the Sword of the End could be used in combination with it. N is literally still using the same resonating ability with his Logos Blade as a Moebius, and we never see a cutscene of it, but assumedly he did the exact same thing with his Pneuma-Blade as an Ouroboros. Alright, here's the fun section. First up, I wanted to point out the difference in design between the Kevesi and Agnian modern Ouroboros forms. All Kevesi forms show a singular interlink orb, whereas all Agnian forms show two interlink orbs. I mulled this over for a while, wondering if it was just design or if it actually meant something, and I concluded that it does. To find out why, we have to ask, what is the difference between Kevesi and Agnian people? Aside from the fact that they're from different worlds, all Agnian soldiers have core crystals, so I speculate that the core crystal could be used to make a second interlink orb, given that they have the ability to make at least one interlink orb in the first place. A few problems arise with this, however. First, Senna's Ouroboros form displays a core crystal on her chest, just like the one she has normally. It couldn't be used for making a second interlink orb then, right? That's true. However, neither Mio nor Taiyan's Ouroboros have core crystals in their Ouroboros forms, so I suspect that this core crystal is not true and it's just part of her design, likely as a result of her lineage. Senna seems to display more blade-like traits than Taiyan or Mio, and I think this could be because her parents may have both been blades, so in my opinion, I can write that off as just part of her design. Second, there's a scene in Chapter 5 where Senna and Taiyan have their limbs chopped off, including their interlink orbs, but despite that, they remain interlinked, and even regenerate those limbs. Well, the answer to this lies with how Ouroboros and Moebius forms manifest, and as N says, they manifest outwards from the core, and they can stay in that form as long as the core remains intact. Because N only cut the limbs and not the cores themselves, they can remain in that form, still being kept alive by those now severed interlink orbs. We also have a clip of Taiyan regenerating, or rather reattaching, his limbs with those orbs to save Senna and Lance. Third, does this mean canonically Agnian Ouroboros are stronger than Kevesi Ouroboros? Actually, maybe. It is canon that Agnians are naturally stronger than Kevesi because of their core crystals, so it might also be the same for their Ouroboros forms. So in canon, maybe they are a bit stronger than the Kevesi versions, but it seems to not be a significant difference in that regard. Fourth, in the Future Redeemed 6-person Ouroboros, 2 of those people had core crystals, being Nile and Glimmer, but we still only saw 6 interlink orbs in the Ouroboros. Do recall that the older Ouroboros stone did not require pairs to create an interlink orb like the modern one does. I think the reason that there's not 8 interlink orbs in that Ouroboros is because the olden one was less developed and was not designed to take advantage of the core crystals. I think that feature would be added during the development of the modern Ouroboros stone, especially since the modern one is not always on and the interlink orbs use their opposing matter bodies to generate energy. Might as well get as much energy as possible and utilize those core crystals. As for Agni and Moebius, P comes to mind considering the American accent. Since P only has a single Moebius core, and since the only core crystals we see on all Moebius except M are Moebius cores, I think that Agni and Moebius have their core crystals extracted, which is why they all only have one Moebius core in their Moebius form. As for M, like I said earlier, I think her Moebius powers were gained through the Moebius equivalent to the modern Ouroboros stone rather than a Moebius core. So I think an interlink where she is dominant would display 2 Moebius cores rather than 1, just like Agni and Ouroboros forms using the modern Ouroboros stone. After considering everything, I'm of the opinion that both interlink orbs are the real deal, and the additional additional one is able to be generated with the help of a core crystal. Nia's talent art is named Divine Sword, which could be a hint towards the very real nature of the Pyra and Mithra swords she has with her blade. Also, maybe it was just me, but I always felt like Drifting Soul was not just for Nia, but for Pyra and Mithra too, especially towards the end of the song. Some have rebranded Drifting Soul as just Nia's theme, but I disagree. I think with her being the Pneuma avatar, it makes even more sense to have her battle theme be Drifting Soul, since she really is representing Pneuma, Pyra, and Mithra as well as herself. Another tidbit is that the Drifting Soul battle remix is called Kaleidoscopic Core, and when scanning the Mithra amiibo, one of the items you are given is Kaleido-celery, so perhaps another nod at Nia's relation to Pneuma. Also, Nia states that, quote, information on everything in this world collects right here, about the Cloud Keep, while focusing on the Poppy Ether Furnace thing in the Cloud Keep. However, I don't think that this function is actually kept going by Poppy. I think it has more to do with what is in the bottom of the Cloud Keep. The Poppy Furnace is activated when Nia starts up her castle Ferranis. It seems more likely to me that the main purpose of Poppy is to provide power to the Cloud Keep and connect to Agnes Castle. Now, I said something about there being something in the bottom of the Cloud Keep. Well, if we look, we can see that there's some kind of altar there, and if you go close to it, it glows green. I also mentioned about Nia saying that information on everything in this world collects right here. Well, the only way she could get that kind of information is through Origin, and we know that Pneuma is connected to Origin. Also, Klaus states about Pneuma and Logos in Xenoblade 2 that they were entrusted with managing the blades, and so the blades' core crystals were tasked with relaying all kinds of information to Logos and Pneuma. New code was then created and sent back to the core crystals. Of course, this system no longer exists after Xenoblade 2, but it's an example of how an Aegis can be used for data collection. I think that the physical location of the Pneuma core crystal is inside that altar at the bottom of the Cloud Keep. The green hue, the really important looking presentation, the fact that Nia has Pneuma on her blade, and in my opinion, her being the Pneuma avatar, it all just fits too well for me to ignore. So, there's not nearly the same amount of evidence about Logos' location. Really all I can give is my best guess. I would expect Zed to keep the core near to him inside Origin, and we can see Origin metal underneath the amphitheater, and bright purple light when Noah shatters the floor of the amphitheater. So my best guess is that Logos' physical location is right there, under the amphitheater. Credit to @RickyWoo on Discord for mentioning this to me, and for @ImperfectWork7064 on YouTube for creating this theory. The theory is that essentially that Zed made his own Trinity which replaced the old Trinity processor, with Zed as the Arbiter / Ontos, X being the Logos replacement, and Y being the Pneuma replacement. This does make sense with the roles they have in Aionios, with Zed being the ruler, X who created the colony ranking system, which is a kind of logical job, whereas Y created flame clocks, which are heavily related to lives and souls. Furthermore, in the final boss fight, we see that in their infinite forms, they each glow a different color. Z infinite glows red, X infinite glows purple, and Y infinite glows green. It's a very strong theory, and I definitely agree that Zed has made his own little trinity here, and that those colors are no coincidence. However, I don't believe that this trinity completely replaces the other Aegis cores, though it does largely serve the same purpose that the Aegis cores did initially. Zed's new trinity governs the world spirit / Origin's core while Zed rules it, whereas the Aegis cores are doing something different than before in regards to conducting Ouroboros and Moebius powers. In my opinion, this Zed's trinity is akin to the trinity which Ontos created inside the Xenoblade 1 world. As we can see at the end of Xenoblade 1, Ontos has made his own trinity, and what with Origin's heart containing a form of Ontos, that being Alpha and then A, Zed's trinity is actually very close in nature to that trinity. I don't have much more to say on it, but yeah, I think that this trinity definitely exists, though I don't believe it to be a total replacement for the original cores, since they still have roles inside Aionios. I wanted to point out an effect that is used in only a few instances, that provides more evidence for the Ouroboros stone's relationship with Pneuma. This is the effect where there is a blue ghost coming out of the person's body. We see it when the modern Ouroboros stone is activated, when Matthew uses his mini Ouroboros stone abilities, and in Future Redeemed, we see Alpha use the same ability on Matthew. A states that Alpha had found a piece of turmoil within Matthew and was trying to exploit that, so perhaps this effect is supposed to be a visual representation of someone's psyche being influenced by the core doing the effect. The most important thing here is that that effect is related to Aegises. I also wanted to point out the presence of halos on the Ouroboros and Moebius forms, as they're important in showing how they're related to the Aegises. Halos are indicators of the divine, meaning related to Aegises and or the conduit. As we can see with almost every iteration of the Monado, there is some kind of circle included in the design right above the hilt, save for Pyra and Mithra's swords, though Pneuma's does have a circle on it. Also, artifices all have halos indicating their affiliation with the conduit. Ouroboros and Moebius forms are no different. They all have at least one halo or circle somewhere on their body, some having many of them. To me, this is really good evidence that these forms are associated with Aegises. To be completely fair, circles as part of the design do not always indicate divinity. Since we see circles appear often on Kevesi, Pharaonises, and Levnises, the only part of either of those things you could say might be divine is the flame clock, and of course those are only on Pharaonises, not Levnises. Everything being considered, I'm still confident about the halos on the Ouroboros and Moebius forms. I mean, some Moebius forms have literal halos on them. I think it's pretty clear that the rings on Kevesi, Pharaonises, and Levnises are just a part of their design and not an indication of divinity. Now that we have all of this context, we can look back at some scenes in a new light. The first one that comes to mind is the battle with N, Matthew, Nael, and A at the beach in Future Redeemed. This is the first fight that comes to mind when I think about a battle of the Aegises in Aionios. The real fight between the Aegises starts when Nael begins using Ontos' power against the party. N then shows up and uses his Sword of the End and Logos-Blade to stop the attack. N continues attacking Nael using his Logos-Blade and the Sword of the End until he lands a really good blow which damages the Ontos core possessed by Nael. N charges a final attack to kill Nael and Alpha, but Matthew blocks the attack with the power of Pneuma that he possesses. Matthew sends another Pneuma boosted punch towards N, which is then blocked by Ontos' power, but this time it is A using that power. It's really cool looking back and seeing how all three Aegises were involved in this fight.
Bastard! That's a hell of a lot more power than before!
It's the Avatar! Her emotions are heightened. They're feeding straight into Alpha's power.
Nael! Hey, stop this! Please, God, stop! No, not him.
N.
If raw emotion is what affords him strength, it must be disrupted with emotions stronger still. You fail to reach such a zenith. Alpha. I, N, shall thwart you once more. My blade will cut your very will!
Sword of the End. Could I use it?
Sure about that? I am Nael, you know.
I am divorced of all that. All doubts. Misgivings gone!
No.
Help me. Matthew.
This again, Alpha. Really?
Nael!
It is over.
No! Stop!
It's you.
Like killing Grandad wasn't enough for you? Now Nael, too! Huh? The hell are you playing at, eh? Why?
Another time where all three Aegises were involved would be when N was ordered to kill the city's inhabitants. First, even before the scene, we see Matthew's Pneuma-Blade collide with N's Sword of the End, shooting up Pneuma green light to origin, which is then reflected down, showing the memory of the last time the Pneuma-Blade and Sword of the End were used together. N and Nael fight. It's a fight of Logos versus Ontos. N eventually overpowers Nael and was about to land the finishing blow when Gondor stepped in front of his blade. In this moment, Gondor uses the core part of his Pneuma-Blade and the Sword of the End, which he was stabbed with, to release a powerful explosion, an attempt to free Nael from Alpha Alpha with Pneuma's power. You can even see that Pneuma's light is emitted from where his left hand touches his sword. Gondor unfortunately failed in his task, but collaterally he managed to split Ontos in two, Alpha and A. This was probably also how A got Ouroboros powers, since their creation was caused by Pneuma in the Sword of the End, which is very similar to what is in the Ouroboros stone.
In the current of the eternal flow, you need not justify the means. All is swallowed up. Everything. You will go no further. Idiot! See some bloody sense, man!
What's that light? Could it be?
You're just Moebius. But what's this power?
You would never understand. This is my choice!
So you choose to stay in the now, to abandon the future.
The one leaving things behind is you!
Granda, help. Please help.
Niall?
It is done. Alpha.
Leave her! Niall is... she's your family. I can't let you do this. What about Mum? Did she want this too?
You don't need to know. The burden is mine alone to bear.
Mum would tell you to let it go, I'm sure. I know it. But you can't choose this path.
Gondor.
Niall! Granddad! This is the path I have chosen. Matthew. Granddad! Take care of Niall, the future. Granddad! It's in your hands, Matthew.
The last couple of scenes I want to look at are at the end of Future Redeemed, where Alpha is doing the out-of-body effect thing on Matthew, which I mentioned earlier, when N comes and finishes what Gondor was trying to do in the city. Using this Sword of the End and his Logos Blade, N splits Na'el from Alpha.
Crap! Now he's trying to suck Matthew in too.
He's found it. The trace of turmoil. That's still within him.
Discard the past. Let it all go, Matthew.
I won't!
What harm did your kind do? You have done nothing wrong. You simply strode forth towards the future. But the olden humans, they did not find value in it. You must have realized this is not where you belong.
Stop!
Why make a martyr of yourself? Why be a stepping stone? For as long as the old is not excised, mankind has no future.
The old? You say?
It's in your hands, Matthew.
Gotta be kidding me. I'm nowhere near done yet. I'm not dying with so much left undone. I'm not done!
I definitely want to give my answer to who Rex is referring to vaguely in this final scene as well. When Rex refers to those two while holding back Alpha, he means Pyra and Mithra, not Pneuma and Logos. This is foreshadowing for right after when Matthew uses the power of Pneuma combined with the Sword of the End to form the first Ouroboros Interlink. Logos doesn't play any part here. We then get Pneuma versus Ontos, with Alpha finally being defeated. When Ace scolds Shulk and Rex for wanting to break the rules for their kids, Rex says that if it was them, he doesn't think they would even bat an eyelid at helping. The camera then focuses on N's Logos Blade and Matthew's Pneuma-Blade. In my interpretation, this offers two possibilities for what he means. Either Pneuma and Logos, or Pneuma and the Xenoblade 1 cast. I think it is way more likely to be the former, especially given the context that A is Ontos to a degree, she is batting an eyelid at helping. So Rex is referencing the other two Aegis cores to kinda guilt trip A into bending the rules. With just the dialogue, it would also make sense to just be Pyra and Mithra, but that doesn't work with how the camera focused on N's blade. Also notice in this scene that the Origin metal lacks that Moebius purple, even though the outside of Origin still has it during the time when Alpha is in control. We also see this during the end of 3 after Moebius is defeated and Origin is freed, as well as before the intersection when Origin was still in two halves. This makes sense since we know that control of Origin is really never uniform. It's divided among multiple administrators, constantly shifting. So when Alpha became active, that area in the heart of Origin was cleared of Moebius. But Moebius still exists in Origin, hence the purple looks on its outside. This is also how those Moebius beings in the end of 3 manifest. Really, they're just amalgamations of Origin metal loaded with Moebius feeling, and Origin's feature of granting power to emotion is what permits them to exist.
He's still standing? After all this? Cheers to old Klaus! His gifts just keep on giving! Damn it! If only those two were here!
Matthew, raise up your fists.
What?
I will grant you the sword's power. Transfer it to your Fists of the End.
That light.
No way! Drive it in! Release the power of Ouroboros! Shut the hell up already! I ain't taking orders from you!
Matthew, your actions have made the future uncertain. Have you no regrets? Given a choice of this magnitude, surely there is doubt.
Oh, believe me, got them in spades. That's why we move forward. Always ahead. See ya. Alpha.
Right we are. Just one last thing then.
Yeah. You got it.
Hey!
Alpha was, and I am, an avatar. The spirit of your world. Just like Alpha needed all of you. You and your world. You need me.
An avatar? What?
It's no more. So someone else has to pick up the slack.
The Annihilation events, they'll keep happening whether you like it or not. The world needs a bit of propping up.
Until the time comes. Yes.
Hold up a minute. Who's someone? And for how long?
Well, you work that part out.
Don't do this! You don't have to sacrifice yourselves!
It's not like that. We're helping.
And that's different how exactly?
Fundamentally. Glimmer. As long as you lot do your part to change this world, it'll all go back to normal.
And if we don't manage, then what? My lifetime. It's barely a blip.
If you don't, pass it on.
Huh?
Let someone else carry on your dream. That's how we've always rolled. Us lot.
It's not much, but we can offer you a gift. We can imbue you with our life, keep the wheels turning. That way, you'll be able to live out the rest of your lives. Enough time to do what you must.
No, but...
Oh, hey, don't get us wrong now. We're just taking a breather. It's all right. We'll meet again. Trust me.
Teacher. Boss.
This is against the rules. You know this.
Don't be a spoilsport now. If it was them, I don't think they'd even bat an eyelid at helping.
Admittedly. Well, I suppose you have earned it. Very well then. I didn't see or hear anything.
Thanks a lot, Alvis.
Then, it's all up to you now. With us taking the role of the Avatar, Zed may well seize upon it to gain power. What we did, and all that concerns Origin, will become but a dim memory. Nevertheless, our intentions will live on, and one day coalesce again, Be it tomorrow, or in 1,000 years. Surely, the time will eventually come. I can see it, clear as day.
Our future is in your hands.
We'll be waiting, at the far edge of time. You actually did see it coming, didn't you? All that's happened.
Right. And all that will.
The only thing I see is what the flow encompasses. But your hope lives on. That much is certain.
And just one last scene, in Chapter 1 of the main game, when 6 main characters meet up for the first time, Noah's sheath begins to glow bright green starting partway through his fight with Mio. Guernica notices this light, looks at the Ouroboros stone, which is emitting the same colored light, and realizes the fateful position he's been put in. In my opinion, the green light from Noah's sword was his Sword of the End resonating with the Ouroboros stone. It lit up as the battle became more intense, and stopped lighting up when the battle died down. So I think that it was involuntary with Noah's emotions being heightened. I don't think that Noah's Pneuma-Blade was involved in this instance, since at this moment he was not empowered by the Ouroboros stone yet. So like the other Vanum descendants, he shouldn't be able to use that power quite yet.
How could she react so quickly? Can't seem to hit her.
What's that sound?
She's so fast. And yet, her moves are really simple. It's almost like they have a rhythm. The Agnian Offseeing tune. I know how that goes. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3.
He's not even looking at me.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2.
He hit me. Why you?
Hang on. The fighting stopped. When did that... At this rate, one of us is going to get killed. No. Maybe both of us will. Something strange is going on. We shouldn't be fighting like this. We should run. Run. Was it me who just said that? What is this? There's no time to think. I have to trust my gut. This is all too real. I hope I'll be able to get through to her. You're an Offseer from Agnes, right?
What the?
So you are then. Why are you fighting me?
As if you can talk. You're the ones attacking us. What, too scared to fight now? Too late!
It's not to do with fear. It's that sound. You can hear it too, I know you can!
We're fighting because there are enemies to kill. You think we'd have let you go?
This is bad. At this rate... Is that all you have to say, Agnes? I'm telling you!
Enough! I'm telling you that you're full of it! Take that!
Do I really have to kill her? But she's so fast. If I lose focus for a second, I'm done for.
These Kevesi Offseers. I thought they were just window dressing, but he's different. And there's his sword. What's up with that?
Huh? What's that? Oh, I see. I suppose this is the reason I'm here then, eh? Guess this is what they call fate. Fine then. Time for Guernica Van Dam to make an entrance!
What the...
What do you all think you're doing? Why the fighting?
What's this guy saying?
Just why? Answer me!
What do you mean, why? If I see an enemy, I fight! So don't you... interfere! Ugh!
Pull the wool from your eyes, kid. Think about your real target. That thing! And me. Now you just have your little scrap. Do you have any idea who the real enemy is? It's over!
Wow, that was a lot, but I am glad that I took the time to go through all this and come to my own conclusions. I feel much more satisfied watching and playing the game now. I feel like I really understand everything that's going on. I had put off making this video for a while just because I didn't feel like I was comfortable enough in my understanding yet to make such a comprehensive explanation. And also, I knew it would end up being ridiculously long. Oh, there are still some things that I didn't explain in this video that I feel are important for other less central points in the story. But as far as the Aegises and Monados go, I'm pretty sure I covered just about everything there is to say about them in regards to Aionios in this video. Hopefully, this should provide you with a really good basis for finding your own interpretation of the story, and maybe even crafting your own theories. Or maybe it just helped you understand what's going on in the overarching narrative a little bit better, and that's good too. I'm not sure where I stand on how Monolith has gone about revealing all this lore, since the clues are all there, but it takes a ton of work to find everything out for yourself, way beyond the realm of Xenoblade 1 and 2's lore, which is much more easily deciphered. I really enjoy all the lore, but I do wish it was somewhat more accessible. Leaving so much up to interpretation is bound to result in people coming up with very different explanations, which has proven true so far. This is unlike Xenoblade 2's lore, where there were a few areas of contention, whereas in Xenoblade 3 there's a ton to disagree on since they barely give any direct explanations, especially in the main story. But oh well, I'm content with my own explanations, so I'm satisfied. I'm excited to see what Monolith will do in the next game. Personally, I hope that maybe we'll get a game set wherever the conduit came from or disappeared to. I think a game set pre-Klaus incident would also be really cool, especially if we get a more powerful switch that can handle more dense environments. Next up, I think I'll do a video on light motes and flame clocks, since I've got most of all that figured out, and it's much simpler than everything in this video. I really hope you all enjoyed this video. This is the culmination of thinking for nearly 4 months straight about all this lore, sorting through everything I know, and going back over and over to find things I missed. It's been a lot, but it's been a lot of fun too, so I can't complain. I'll see you in the next video. Remember to be respectful to your fellow Xenoblade fans, and have a good one. Peace.